Okay, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you if you're new. Thanks to all the rest of y'all. We are flying by the seat of our pants this week, my friends. I am not at home. I am in North Garden, Virginia. Longtime listeners know I have in-laws who live here. Normally, I do not make the trip at Easter. Often my wife will take my daughters and I get to have a pass. I stay home. And this year, honestly, we were not sure if we were going to make any trip here. If you've been around, you know there's been a lot going on, but we decided to do it and it didn't feel right to make my wife do it all on her own. So here I am. I'm in North Garden, Virginia, and I have literally stolen away for a few moments and snuck into a bedroom in order to make this intro happen. I had set some time aside earlier today when I thought I would be able to do it, but that time disappeared in a swirl of Easter egg hunts and just navigating the whole situation. Let's just say it hasn't exactly been relaxing for me, but I am glad we came. I do think it's been a good thing, but I haven't had any of the time I would normally have had to get my head into a good place or think about anything I might want to talk about or do any of the normal rituals I would do in preparation to record this intro. So I am just rolling with it. Sometimes this is what we have to do. And fortunately, I have an amazing talk to share with you today. So even if this intro is subpar, I feel very confident that my talk today with Indu Arora will make up for any shortcomings. If you've been around, you know that I started an online teacher training at the beginning of the year, and it's been a real process for me of reevaluation. I did teacher trainings for many years in the past, and I swore them off, and then coming back to engaging with people in study, it's involved me wanting to be clear about what I know, what I don't know, ways in which I feel are fruitful to engage the tools of study and ways in which I don't always think it's useful. I've been fleshing this out with fellow teachers in my weekly teachers call, and a number of topics arose around Westerners who are embracing these practices that come from cultures that we were not born into. And if you've been around, you've heard me talking about meditation and samadhi and hatha yoga pradipika and non-duality and duality. All these things have been sort of swirling around, and someone in the group mentioned Indu, and I was just so overjoyed to have this opportunity to connect with her. I asked her about all this stuff, and she offered such wonderful insights. It felt like a real gift to make this connection with her, and I'm very glad to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to that, if you want to connect with me in ways other than just listening to the show, then there are a lot of opportunities to do that. I have weekly ongoing live stream classes. I have that weekly teachers discussion that I mentioned. I've got my online teacher training. I've got on-demand videos, archives of this show. Everything that I'm doing can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay. I think we're just going to leave it there. This may be one of the shortest intros I've ever done, but I don't even have my laptop here, which it's not like I take a lot of notes for these, but sometimes I have like a few bullet points for things that might want to be announced or whatever. I don't have anything, and I'm worried that any moment someone's going to call my name and tell me that dinner's ready. So we are going to leave it here. I will touch base with you for just a moment on the other side. But for now, let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Indu Arora. Hello?
Hi, James. Should I call you Jay? James, please tell me.
It is Jay, short for Jason. You can call me Jay. Most of my friends call me that, and I would love for you to call me that as well.
Okay. Hello, Jay. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. I really appreciate you giving me this time today. Thank you for doing this.
It is my pleasure, Jay. Thanks for having me.
And I am already recording, as I know you may already see, and I like to consider us having just begun, so I don't want that to be a surprise to you. Is that okay?
It's absolutely okay.
It's funny, in the past, in the old days, I've been doing this show for 7 years, I think. So in the early days, people were very unfamiliar with podcasts, and I would just start talking to people, and at some point, they would say, "Are we going to start the podcast?" And I'd say, "Oh, we are. This is it." And it would be this very authentic moment. But now these days, people are familiar, and there's kind of a standard thing where you have off-air banter, and then the host does an intro, and then we start. And I don't like to do any of that stuff, but I have found that if I don't say something, sometimes people say things that they don't want to be on there, and it causes other things. So I don't want to take people by surprise anymore.
To me, the podcast has already begun.
Perfect. Well, I'm glad to have this chance to speak with you because your name has come up a number of times in conversations I have with fellow yoga teachers. I facilitate a weekly talk among teachers. I've been doing for about 4 years. And your name's come up 3 different times on 3 different topics. One was when we were talking about yoga nidra, and whether or not yoga nidra is different than meditation and what samadhi means. So maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. And another thing that came up had to do with recently I started a teacher training for the first time in many years because I sort of swore them off for a while because I felt that the 200-hour trainings were no longer really serving the purpose I had in mind. But I changed how and why I was doing it. And part of that brought up a lot of questions for myself and participants around the fact that we've embraced yoga because of these individual personal experiences we've had, but we weren't born into the cultures in which they come from. Mm-hmm. And so it felt like it would be good to hear from someone from that culture. And I have had folks on before. And one other little thread that connects to that too is in this teacher training, we started with some very personal inquiries as to why we do yoga. But we are now looking at Vedas and Samkhya and the Mahabharata and the Gita. And sometimes when you look at the philosophies and the ideas through those vehicles, it can get very abstract and it feels almost unknowable or something. And I have had friends on before, my friend Prabha, who talked about when she grew up in India and how there was sort of the yoga with the priests at the temples. And then there was also the yoga with the moms in the kitchen. And it seems from what I know of you and learned a little bit in getting ready to speak with you, that's kind of where your yoga begins more, it was in your family. And I have spent a little bit of time in India in my life. And I guess my curiosity is that, was your family more interested or connected to yoga and Ayurveda than other families where you grew up? Or would you say that was common among all the people where you lived?
That's a very interesting question, Jay. I think to some extent, there is some kind of a basic introduction of the concepts of yoga, of Bhagavad Gita, of Ayurveda in traditional Indian families. But again, I think it depends upon individual. The individuals who are a part of the family, what are their inspirations and how are they connected to themselves, I would say. So going back and thinking back about my family, which was a joint family, I had the opportunity to be inspired by so many people living in a household. It was not just mom and pop yoga. I don't know if I can say that, but but it was actually my inspiration, real inspiration comes from my grandmother. Growing up in the joint family, just observing her doing the daily chores with a certain attitude and singing the name of the God on in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. And that was inherently tied with yogic lifestyle. I wouldn't say inherently tied to the yogic texts. I would say inherently tied to the yogic lifestyle. And my father, he was an ardent follower of Bhagavad Gita, and my mother used to recite Ramayana every day. So those, I think, passive learning and observation was a part of growing up. Now, I cannot say this for sure that every single household had similar atmosphere, because I really think it boils down to the individuals.
I see. So you just had people in your house who were into yoga.
Yes, now I can look back and say that. At that time growing up, I don't think I knew these terms, yoga, Ayurveda, growing up, I couldn't say that, oh, this is a tantric teaching and this comes from Yoga Sutras and this is from Bhagavad Gita. It was all presented in a way as if it's a part of everyday life. It wasn't presented as a teaching. It was presented as life. It is just that when I grew up, I started connecting those dots.
Mm. And do you remember when that starts to happen? Like, how old are you when it starts to become more of a formal study? I think it's a very interesting distinction that you said, the difference between like text and lifestyle, and how that when it's like a high art study, it's one thing, but when it's just the way you do the dishes, it's another. Do you remember when it starts to become more of like a formal inquiry for you, or more of like a study?
Yes, I think I do remember that moment. I met a teacher and I'm 16 at that time. And that's the time when I met this teacher. He suggested me to take a printout of something which simply says, "Who am I?" And it was so awkward as a teenager to take a printout of something and put it in front of, when you wake up and right in front of your bed and just look at that. And I used to wonder that why am I being suggested to meditate upon this? And in my teenage mind at that time, well, I know who I am. My name is Indu and I am the daughter of so-and-so and this and that. But I did not know what are the deeper layers of this inquiry. So that meeting that teacher, my first introduction was of this inquiry and the second introduction was of mudras. So my journey into yoga begins with the study of mudras. And then from that point on, there was no turning back.
And what was like the initial, like, why were you even studying with that teacher? Like, how does that happen?
It was, I don't know if there are coincidences or there are karmas or there are both.
They're probably the same thing.
Yes, exactly, isn't it? But, truly, it doesn't matter what the reason is, Jay. What matters is that this intertwining happened and it completely stormed my life and formed at the same time. I was academically bright student and I was into sports and theatrics and academics and all these things. So when all of that happens, when all of that success happens at that young age, it can go into your head pretty quickly. So I like to be that, point of attention. And when I met this teacher made me realize that there is more to life than that. So that was a crushing moment, that there is more to life than the center point that I consider as myself. And now I'm giving this inquiry, who am I? So for me, it doesn't matter what the reason was, because we can get attached to that reason and then create a box around it. But for me, what's important is it happened and what happened after and what am I doing with it?
I love the point. It's well made. It doesn't really matter, because it's just a curiosity. And you kind of answered it, because those teachers, I mean, I remember certain figures in your life that kind of just put you in your place at the right moment. And you need those kind of mentor people in your life. But for you, it was a yoga teacher. And I think that's coming back to the conversation I had with my fellow teachers. Like, none of us had people, like every once in a while, someone had like a Richard Hittleman book, or like a Rodney Yee video, or it's the first yoga class or the first Shavasana. But we didn't have it baked in to the culture. And I've said that before jokingly, that I felt like the 3 months I spent in India, there were times where I felt like I learned more about yoga navigating the train stations than like my teacher trainings. But there was something true about that. And I guess it makes me think a little bit about, for you, coming from yoga in the way that you have, born into that culture, and then having evolved professionally, because I know you've gone on to do lots since then, and we can talk more about that too. I know you do work at the IYT and stuff, but it's interesting to me because I often talk about, from my Western viewpoint, that, you know, like yoga went into the mainstream. And then there's been lots of conversations in the years just before the pandemic about cultural appropriation. And I was having a lot of those conversations on this show. So I guess from your vantage point, has it felt offensive to you to see yoga go into the Western culture in the way that it has? Are you one of the people who don't feel as cynical about it? I don't know. I'm curious, from your vantage point, what's that like to see your culture become people's underwears or whatever, you know, like some not great things seem to happen.
I'm thinking about it, Jay. It is interesting to observe how people understand yoga evolve. I'm consciously choosing my word. I don't want to say how yoga evolves, because I think the state of yoga remains the same. It is perennial wisdom. It is not something that changes. Our perception of it changes based on the limited goals that we carve for ourselves or our limited readiness. So for me, it is and it was interesting to see that what aspects of this wisdom, this lifestyle, this philosophy do people and groups and organizations and communities and cultures choose to absorb and adapt to, and what they change about yoga so that it becomes an entry point to them. Has it been offensive? Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does bring the question that I wish this person would have been more curious. Because I feel that what happens is we become compliant. That, okay, this is fun, or some aspect of the culture is fun, or some aspect of this practice can be brought in as workout, or some aspect of this practice is aligned with the modern science. And we pick only those pieces that we are ready to digest, understand, and accept. And what is left behind is a part of it. And my point, the point that I think from is, I wondered if this person had more curiosity. And then they could have been able to dig deeper, that there is so much more. But I have to tell you that I'm very much focused on repaying the debt of wisdom that has been given to me by my teachers, by my gurus. My focus is just that, do your part. Does not mean neglect other things. If something intersects with my life, I would respond to it accordingly. But otherwise, I feel that just by doing my part, I hope that I'm creating these teachings, not me, but I hope that these teachings are creating a ripple effect that can make others be more curious, be more inquisitive, and at the same time feel empowered with the teachings itself.
Yes, I've heard you talk about that, how we wouldn't want to use knowledge to create judgment, but we would want to use knowledge to create empowerment.
Yes. That is my limited point of view.
Well, seems quite expansive to me. But I think one of the things that we're coming to in our conversation, what it seems you're pointing to as well, is that when you are curious, and I think the people that I'm interacting with have often, they may have started on a more cursory level with yoga, but I think for a lot of folks at some points, they've hit inflection moments in their lives, like deep tragedies or deep difficulties. And yoga practice was this vehicle that helped them through that and helped shape who they were. So there's a deep reverence for whatever it is. And I think that translates out when you look to where it comes from, which is a very natural part, I think, a process of someone wanting to understand, okay, what's happened to me when I do this yoga nidra practice, and where does it come from, that you begin to hold the history and the philosophies and the traditions with more reverence. And that's why I think people who are mindful are wanting to honor the teachings in ways that are helpful and not, are appreciative rather than appropriative.
Absolutely. There is a couple of things that are coming to my mind. And one of the things, Jay, is that if you look back at the culture and in a way, the history of yoga, or how someone used to, hundreds of years back, get into the journey of yoga, it was out of this deep yearning of this, to understand the the existential queries, and to understand the self and to understand the world. So there was already a kind of readiness. There was already a kind of readiness to let go and to let in. There was already a kind of readiness to do the hard work. There was already a kind of readiness to seek. And not just to settle in with the basic, may I say, benefits, or as my teacher used to say, the side effects of yoga. That if you're looking for strength or flexibility or healing this or healing that, those are side effects of yoga. That's not the real fruit of yoga. That the purpose of yoga is yoga. It's not anything else. The purpose of yoga is yoga. We may create an anchor point somewhere along the way and get attached to it, and then just start talking about that and create a whole system, style out of it. But that doesn't mean that is the purpose of yoga. So that to me, I feel that when we begin from that yearning point, instead of FOMO, fear of missing out. Oh, my friend is doing this. Oh, this is trending, so I think I should know more about it. And among these things, what is the most trending one, or what is the most advertised one? I think our anchor points become outside of us. And instead of inside of us, what am I looking for? What am I ready for? What is my mind ripe for in this moment? So I start looking for a teacher or the teachings from that point.
Yeah, I think that sometimes teacher training became the place where people got to inquire deeper. Like if you just drop into 60-minute classes, you weren't necessarily going to learn more into yoga. That if you wanted to learn more, you had to go to yoga teacher trainings. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, the yoga teacher trainings became so much about asana and some of the other aspects of practice that people weren't really always asking the deeper questions, which, as you're saying, and I think most of the people who listen to the show would agree, is the deeper purpose behind these things. That's what I meant earlier when I said the teacher trainings were no longer serving that deeper purpose. It was this expectations game, and people weren't showing up in that same way, Like you say, in the old days, I guess you had to seek out a teacher and then convince them you were worthy. But now it's I pay, now give me the yoga or something. It's not the same dynamic, but that starting from a place of deep inquiry and humble, laying yourself at the feet and saying, I'm ready to learn. Like in the Gita, right? I will do what you say or whatever. That's where the deeper yoga inquiry starts.
Absolutely. And I consider myself a student of these subjects, yoga, Ayurveda, Tantra. And I'm not saying it because, it sounds humble. I'm saying it because I know it is the truth. I am just a student of these subjects. And if throughout my life I can just stay a sincere student, that itself will complete the dharma of it. However, what I feel is when you are a student of a subject, the student also has to operate from a certain level of discernment. There is a certain level of due diligence that, in my limited understanding, lies on that responsibility lies on the shoulders of the one who is seeking. Instead of just going towards whatever is available, have you searched first of all within what you're looking for, and second, have you also researched whom are you seeking it from? Has that person, is the person living the subject, living what they are talking about, to some extent, at least honestly striving towards it? Or is it just something which is, not that anything is wrong with the term, that it has just become a profession, that it has just become a trend? That I feel that it's so important. And from that, what happens, Jay, is there is a relationship of trust. And when there is a relationship of that trust, then comes surrender. Instead of, questioning that, is this teacher right 10 years down the lane, 5 years down the lane, you simply become curious, because it is already, the foundation is there. The foundation is there of due diligence followed by surrender. And I feel that in that case, when there is forming and storming, like the number of teachers that I can count on my one hand that I have met, and they have transformed completely, still, like, you're breaking you into pieces, have done that to me. There was no question that why they are doing this to me. There was no question that, this person may have their own personal agenda, or maybe there is some abuse of power that might be happening. There was that surrender, that knowing that this person has no other agenda except for to bring out the best, and to simply make myself a container, a vessel, so that I can be touched by the yogic teachings and maybe become someone who can share about it.
I mean, such valuable advice, and we've certainly talked about that as well here on the show and in those groups about for so many of us, like when I came into yoga in the early 90s, the generation before me had gone to India and come back. They met the gurus and they put the pictures up on the altars. And then, a lot of those gurus were put up on very high pedestals, and there wasn't a lot of the discernment that you're describing going on. And a part of that, I think, is because we weren't born into those cultures. And a lot of times those gurus were abusive people. And so I think a lot of very earnest practitioners and teachers had to do some very deep work reassessing, and have had to find other sources. I believe the episode before this, I talked with someone named Frey Faust, who's a somatic movement person. A lot of yoga teachers looked towards different sources. But then again, a lot of us at the same time, even after we've done that, still felt like, no, this is what yoga teaches, what's happening with me. That the teachings of yoga speak to a certain truth that even though it does come from the cultures that you come from, and I think humility and reverence is warranted, is there something universal too, that when you do these breathing and moving exercises and this chanting, and you have like an experience, not necessarily like even a knowledge of the experience, it seems to be the same things that were being talked about.
Absolutely. There is something that you mentioned, Jay, that I would like to talk about for a minute. You mentioned about the pictures of the guru.
Yeah.
Something that in my yoga room, there is no picture of the guru. And that is because my gurus, first of all, whom I call my guru, they never accepted the title of the guru. One, and second, they never wanted their pictures anywhere. Because for them it was clear that I am not the goal, the teaching is. So I feel that is also important. Any real guru will not ask you to call them guru or will write it before their name as if, it is not a title that you give to yourself. It is something that people bestow upon you as with respect, with admiration, with awe, with wonder, and it is not something that you simply proclaim. And I feel I have my limited understanding. Please know that, listeners and Jay, that I'm speaking only from my limited understanding, and maybe 5, 10, 20 years down the lane, I may speak something different of this because I feel there is scope of growth for everyone. But for now, my limited idea is that any true guru would know that the guru, in embodied guru, a person who is guru, is not the goal. The teaching is.
Yeah, that seems to go to what I mentioned before that I've heard you say about knowledge for empowerment rather than knowledge for judgment. That if there is a guru in your life, that guru would be empowering you, not making you feel like in servitude to them necessarily. Well, it kind of makes me think a little bit. This is maybe a transition because you mentioned trends and people doing things rooted in deeper experience or in trends. And, Yoga Nidra is real popular right now. And there's a lot of reasons why. I think because of everything that's been happening in the world, that particular practice has been very helpful to people. But I guess I am kind of curious because I know you're someone who teaches Yoga Nidra, and I've heard different people talk about it in terms of it being like a very specific lineage tradition. And then all these other people are calling it Yoga Nidra, but it's not Yoga Nidra. And then I think the other aspect that I'm always curious in that we've had some conversation around whether or not Yoga Nidra was a form of meditation or if that's like a totally different thing.
It is, to some extent, it is nice to see that such a deep and ancient practice called Yoga Nidra is being talked about, and so many of us are curious about it and want to learn it, and not just want to learn it, but want to teach it. So I think one of the things that create distance is if you're joining something just so that you can teach, or if you're joining a program so that first you can learn and know that such a deep subject requires your time, dedication in order for the teaching to become experience and some level of realization. And from that realization, when you share, there is authenticity. Otherwise, you may become someone who is a teacher of techniques. Or if you are reading certain texts and know of all the tantric and yogic and Upanishadic and Vedic references, you become a teacher who has a scholarly bent of mind and become a teacher of references. The way I have been introduced to these teaching is be someone who is a teacher who passes on experiences, not just references and not just techniques. So I feel that kind of brings maybe a little bit curiosity and clarity that Yoga Nidra is not the name of a method, the name of a technique. It is the name of a state. It is not a method, because when we explore it as a method, then what happens is, My method is better than your method. My method is more authentic than your method. My lineage is more authentic than your lineage. But the heart of the matter is that both yoga and Yog Nidra, they are passed on as oral tradition, but eventually both of them are states of realization. And the way I put Yog Nidra is that Yog Nidra is a bridge between dhyana and samadhi. So it is one step forward than meditation, not just meditation. What does it mean? When we talk about dhyana, and there are so many different ways we can talk about dhyana depending upon from which culture you're going to pick references and talk about the history and understanding of the term meditation itself. I speak from the standpoint of either Tantra or Yoga, the word dhyana, which means that dhi, which is your mind, which means to come forward, that when all the scattered pieces of your mind come forward and merge into one, that plurality becoming singularity, and that singularity becoming nothing, that is the state of meditation. A lot of time meditation is often connected to certain experiences. Experiences are only possible when there is duality. Experience is not possible when there is singularity. So what we are recounting when someone is recounting a certain kinesthetic experience or auditory experience or visual experience or olfactory experience or gustatory experience, we are still in the realm of the body and senses. We are still recounting sensory motor experiences. Meditation is beyond the body and even beyond the mind. And if and when it is a state of drawing forward all the scattered pieces of mind together into one place, and that oneness also become noneness, then what is there to recount? What we are recounting is the experience of dharana, that is concentration, or a little bit of relaxation as a result of relaxation, which we are so deprived of. As a result of that, we go into that, at times, hypnagogic state, into that alpha brainwave modulation, into that parasympathetic nervous system. That is so foreign to us, that is so new to us, that it feels like we are floating in a different realm. But meditation is something where all the energies are gathered and they become like a laser beam, and it becomes, I wouldn't use the word hyper focus, but a single pointed focus, where in that moment, the focus, the object and the doer, there is no separation between the three. However, because your question is related to Yog Nidra, and I know I'm going a little bit longer, Jay.
No, go. It's amazing. Please.
Deep subject that, I feel that I don't want to dilute. I don't want to, there is no one line answer, except for saying meditation and Yog Nidra are two different states. If they were not two different states, they would not have two different names, period. Mm-hmm. And the state of Yog Nidra is, we generally practice Nidra, Yog Nidra. First of all, a lot of time people call it just Nidra, which is by itself taking away so much from it. It is practiced in a supine state with gravity. And when you practice this with gravity, naturally the guna, the state that takes over, it surfaces up, is tamas. Dullness, heaviness with gravity, sleepiness, drowsiness, inertia takes over. In that state, it's almost like inviting that state, and in that state maintaining awareness, not concentration, maintaining awareness as we reach that state which is beyond the five elements, which is beyond the experiences of the five elements, beyond the experiences of the sensory motor apparatus, that we maintain that layer of awareness which includes the state of meditation, which includes the state of concentration. It's almost like, I like to give food examples, Jay. It's almost like there is a slice of tiramisu in front of you, which is a layered cake, and it has a spongy part, and it has a moist part, and it has a creamy part, and you take your fork and you put it all the way to the bottom, and then you enjoy it. That is Yog Nidra. Meditation is just one part of it, and concentration is just one part of it, and relaxation is just one part of it. Yog Nidra is having the taste of all of them and yet not getting attached to any one of them. That is Yog Nidra. That is why it is closest to the state of Samadhi, not equal to Samadhi. Closest to the state of Samadhi. It is a bridge between meditation and Samadhi, which allows you in your upright position, which means against the gravity, allow you to have an expanded and extended state of meditation, which otherwise becomes a flickering moment.
Okay, I think that actually clarifies a lot. And the clarification, I think, has to do with the difference between it being a practice and a state. That because the question around meditation and Yoga Nidra had to do, some people say that you can only practice meditation in a seated position. That was kind of like, can you be meditating if you're not in a seated position? And you kind of said that there, that ultimately there is the upright to gravity aspect potentially, and that Yoga Nidra being this more tamasic practice, which is very interesting that you said, because I've said that before. People got upset with me because they're like, it's not tamasic. It could be rajasic while you're laying there. I'm like, I don't know, in terms of like dynamism, like doing something or like releasing to the energy of not doing or whatever. It's interesting to hear you say that. But I guess, so just to make sure I heard you right, you are saying that one, as like states, they're very different, or as you said, they be called the same thing, although sometimes they call things by different names. I guess I could hear what you're saying, that there's something about the rest aspect, the sleepless sleep aspect to Yoga Nidra that is different than like when you're in a seated place and something else is happening there. Mm-hmm. But I guess in terms of the practices, you're acknowledging that meditation would be seated as opposed to reclining.
So I will say a couple more things, Jay. One is, once someone learns to be established in the state of meditation, it can be in any activity. It can be walking, it can be sitting, but are we there yet?
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.